Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz. Oh, he triggered some. But how did he do so? Well, let's see. He introduced a simple resolution that would ensure that our Pledge of Allegiance be read before every meeting of the House Judiciary Committee. Sounds totally legit. We're the United States of America. That's the Judiciary Committee, judicial, backbone of our country, laws. So reciting our pledge to this nation, to our flag, that seems pretty acceptable, right? No, not in the minds of these unpatriotic libtards who call themselves Democrats these days. Now, for a little background here, Gaetz first called for the committee to open with the pledge 2 years ago. But the then chairman, Democrat Jerry Nadler, told him it was unnecessary since the members already pledged allegiance on the House floor every single morning. Unnecessary, Jerry? I'll tell you what's unnecessary, Mr. Nadler. Your saturated fat and carb intake. But anyway, there was another sparring match, again, over the pledge this week. But this time it was between Gaetz and the Rhode Island, very corrupt Ivy League, I've never served a day in uniform Congress member named David Cicilline. Watch this garbage.
Because I think if we adopt this amendment, then we will be truthful in representing that stating this pledge is an affirmation of your defense of democracy and the Constitution. It's hard to take that claim seriously if, in fact, an individual who in any way supported an insurrection against the government of the United States is allowed to lead the pledge. So I would ask Mr. Gaetz to accept this friendly amendment, and I look forward to supporting it.
Would the gentleman yield for
first ask Mr. Gaetz if he'll support the amendment, to make sure that someone who led an insurrection against the United States doesn't make a mockery of the Pledge of Allegiance and stand before this committee with their hand over their heart claiming to support the Constitution.
Mr. Cicilline, my concern would be if your definition of an insurrection is objecting to electors, then there would be many Democrats on the committee that wouldn't be eligible to lead the pledge, since so many
That's not my definition of an insurrection.
The last Republican president to get sworn in absent Democrat objectors was George Herbert Walker Bush.
And while we're talking about Mr. Gaetz, I want to give him and other members of Congress kudos. Why? Because we've been talking a lot lately about the censorship of this network and other conservative networks. And Matt is one of the few who've been standing up for freedom of speech and freedom of press on the House floor. This is over 20 members earlier this week stood in protest and discussed the cancellation of Newsmax and OAN by AT&T's DirecTV.
My fellow Americans, there is a broad effort underway to deplatform, demonetize, and destroy anyone who has a conservative, America First perspective. We've seen this with Newsmax, with One America News. We saw Google work to demonetize the Federalist. And my question is this: when did we become so frail as a country? When did we take the position that if we saw something we didn't agree with, that somehow that would dehumanize us and limit our ability to participate in meaningful dialogue?
That's why I love this guy. Representing Florida's 1st District, Congressman Matt Gaetz. And Matt, I'll just tell you face to face right here, thank you so much. I was a little disappointed there was only, 20-some of you out of 221. I was expecting a better turnout of members of Congress to stand up for free speech, for free press, and for OAN and Newsmax. But that's okay. We'll take it as we can get it. Before we get into the pledge, before we get into the censorship, we got to go back to the news of the day, of course. Had on your colleague Corey Mills a bit ago. The spy balloon floating over American airspace, and this regime does nothing. I know you want to weigh in on this first.
We all have balloon mania. I mean, you've got some folks who want to shoot down the balloon, some folks who want to capture the balloon. I think Joe Biden wants to know what the balloon's pronouns are. Eric Swalwell wants to date the balloon. And General Mark Milley believes that the balloon might help him get in touch with his white rage. So with all of that said, I think it's pretty easy to assess that this would not be happening if Donald Trump were president, because there was an unpredictability to President Trump that ensured that we were not messed with as a country, because our adversaries never quite knew when Donald Trump might have a disproportionate response to something like this. Now that this balloon has entered our airspace, I do not believe that we should allow it to leave our airspace and return with any sort of information that could cause a risk to our country. So I guess everyone will have balloon mania for a little bit longer.
Well, I better keep my opinion myself. I want to keep OAN on the air as long as I can and keep my job. But as
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's going on in our country right now.
Can we?
We've got divided government, and we've got to be able to work together to find solutions. You see woke corporations like DirecTV, AT&T taking just content off the air, not because it is not commercially viable and helpful to the shareholders of their company, but because they don't like the viewpoint. It is just viewpoint discrimination. And if I own stock in AT&T or DirecTV, which I do not, what I would do is bring a derivative action. And I would say, gosh, why are you letting wokeness decrease the value of my investment in your company? Because all of the data would suggest that this is a decision that is solely being made as a consequence of threats from members of Congress, Democrat members of the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over a lot of telecommunications issues. They threatened AT&T and DirecTV, and they said that if you do not take this action to remove certain companies, that there would be consequences, and that gaslit a decision that never should have been made and that harms our ability to experience divergent viewpoints. Look, I don't want to take crazy left-wing perspectives off the air. I think the more those people talk, the more it brings people of sanity and common sense to our side. But we have totally flipped the script from a time in which classical liberals advocated for a robust marketplace of ideas to now, like, inside the heart of every woke-topian, like, beats a tyrant. And that ought not happen in our country. I
know. I was just talking to somebody this morning in the office, and I'm going, whatever happened, you know, I'll be 49 this year, so let's just say going on 50 years old, Matt. And I go, what happened to those Democrats when I was in my 20s and 30s? 20, 30 years ago, you could have a conversation with the ones that, like the Vietnam era, that were against the government, that believed in conspiracy theories that were coming true, that were all for free speech and freedom of the press and thought the man was putting them down. They've turned into these speech Nazi tyrants. I don't know how they call themselves liberals or Democrats anymore. Anyway, appreciate you, what you guys are doing. Let's hopefully we can get back on. I just want to get through all the lies with folks out there so they understand there was no negotiating behind the scenes for more money on our part. We were like giving the product away. And it wasn't about ratings either, Matt, because let me tell you what, we actually had higher ratings than I believe Newsmax in certain time periods last year before they pulled our plug. And so while we and Newsmax were going up, you've got CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, which, by the way, are all on the satellite, all on the cable carriers. They've actually been going down over the last 2-3 years. So you can't blame it on ratings and you can't blame it on negotiations. This is purely political. All right, now I want to turn to the... Yep, go ahead.
Consequence of your success, right? Because more and more Americans are turning to channels like OAN, you're perceived as more of a threat, and thus you have to be extinguished. And that is really dark if you think about it. It sounds more like what you would see in communist China than what we ought to experience in the United States. And I think that the Congress ought to have hearings on some of the conflicts of interest that I believe led to this decision.
Well, I know that at least 20 of you are pushing for those hearings, so let's see them. Appreciate you. About a minute left. I got to switch gears to the pledge, because you started this battle 2 years ago, and thank you, with Mr. I Can't Put the Sandwich Down Nadler, and now you're dealing with this Sisseline guy. By the way, I looked him up. Brown University. His dad was a mafia lawyer. His brother's been indicted. He broke the piggy bank in Providence when he was mayor and just totally fleeted out that city, spent all their money. This guy's a real piece of work dirtbag. And then he's up there trying to school you on who should say the pledge and who shouldn't. First of all, I don't believe he's ever served a day in the military, put a uniform on, so he doesn't understand how important the pledge is. Your thoughts on this guy?
Well, I believe the Judiciary Committee is a special place to utilize the Pledge of Allegiance for unity. I mean, if we're going to have some of the toughest, most rambunctious debates of the day about our constitutional rights, about our gun rights, about our freedoms and liberties, could we at least start by acknowledging that we all pledge allegiance to the flag and that we recognize that we are one nation under God, that we rise or fall together? So I don't know why these things have to be controversial, but, on The View, they criticized me for this, and one of the hosts, Sonny Houston, said it's because America really shouldn't be viewed as an exceptional country. So their resistance and their critique of the Pledge of Allegiance is really a veiled critique of American exceptionalism, because on the left, they don't want our country to be viewed as this great example to the world. They want us to be diminished, and they want to replace the great country we have now with some socialist woketopia that really would be a dark and terrible thing for just, all of our country, all of our people, future generations. And so that's why it's so important for us to re-emphasize these great values and this great commitment to our great country.
I know you got to go. They'll give me the hard rap. 10 seconds, though. Who gets the best supporting actress? Is it AOC or Tlaib? Which one on the floor yesterday? You probably saw it firsthand.
Yeah, folks are pretty fired up about that. I think that had Omar not voted to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar, that this day might not have come, but hopefully we can put an end to this. I think it's like play stupid games, win stupid prizes, kicking people off committees. Let's get to the business of the country and move beyond it.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, have a good weekend. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you.